Excel's pivot table feature is a great tool for analyzing data. Along with it, we can also use another tool called conditional formatting. This is a feature that highlights data by way of data bars, color scales, or icon sets. We can use the two features together. Let's first create a pivot table from this list. I'll go to the Insert tab, choose Recommended Pivot Tables. I'll just go with the first option. I'll double-click it. We're on a new worksheet. I want to add salesperson to this list also. I'll simply check the box for salesperson. And now I'm going to move region from the row labels area down the left-hand side. I'll move it into columns for a more compact pivot table. And before proceeding further with anything, I will also, within the pivot table, remove the terms row labels and column labels, replacing them with the actual field names. And we can do that by way of the Design tab, choosing Report Layout, Outline, or Tabular. Now, a couple different approaches to using conditional formatting. I think the best is simply to click within the pivot table, go to the Home tab, choose Conditional Formatting, and set up a new rule. Excel recognizes this is a pivot table. We've got two options here, and if you choose both of them one at a time, you'll see the difference. All cells showing sum of items values. I'm going to choose this first. If I do nothing else, we'll be using a color scale here. I prefer to use icons instead, so I'll click the drop arrow right here, choose icon sets. Lots of options here. First one's okay, the so-called traffic light pattern. It also comes in variations where there are 4, or we can use arrows, and there are 4 or 5 of those as well too. So I'll just go with this one here. Click OK. And because we've got grand total data here, this isn't very valuable. In other words, what it's saying is we got one high number and a bunch of others all fall into the low category. So let's undo that and start over. Control Z. And back into conditional formatting. New rule. This time, the third option here at the top, all cells showing sum of items values for salesperson and region. These are the two fields currently being displayed. And this time I'll go also to the choice where we see color scale, make a change, icon sets. I'll use that same pattern here, traffic light pattern. And now I think it makes a lot more sense. Now we've got 48 results here, and the 3-color pattern divides the data into thirds. It doesn't say that we're going to have 16 greens and 16 yellows and 16 reds. What really happens here is the data is being analyzed and the numerical values are divided into thirds. And only 6 green entries mean only 6 of these entries are in the top third of the actual data values. So we can see at a glance, there's a high number. This one isn't nearly as high, but it's still within the top third of those numbers. It's 237. Here's a 320. And as we look around, here's a 264. So we see the greens, the high values stand out, the reds, quite a bit more of them, the low values stand out. You might prefer to experiment with this, go back to conditional formatting. If you don't want to make any other changes other than to change the rule, you don't have to create a new rule, but you manage the rule. Come back here, select this, edit the rule. This time maybe we'll use a 4-color pattern, or a 5 possibly. Maybe the arrows here, maybe that's a little better. Now we're going to be dividing the data into fourths based on the logic that we see here. In some cases, you might want to consider changing that as well. Click OK and OK. And now we'll have 4 sets of arrows. And only 3 of these are green right now. So only 3 are in the top quadrant or top quartile value-wise. The 320, the 319, the 264. So we see what's happening here. Now, where this starts to get a little bit confusing is what happens when you move and remove fields. First of all, what if I say, well, I don't want region in here anymore. I'll just take it off the grid. I can uncheck it or drag it off either way. We don't see any arrows. I'll bring in product. We're not seeing any arrows there. Now, let me backtrack, do this a different way. I'm going to press Control Z, Control Z. This time I'm going to move region into the filters area, bring in product. We're not seeing anything. But now I'll move product out of filters. Now, before I totally removed it, this time it's coming back from filters. I'll put it over here, filter area. And now we see them along with product here. Maybe I'll move product out of the way for the moment. So as you're moving these back and forth, it seems almost unpredictable, but there is a little bit of logic to it. If I bring product back, in other words, if I put it into the columns area below region, now we're not seeing any numbers here. But if I move region out of the way, and we still not seeing them, I'll move region down below here into rows, and now we're seeing the arrows. And I think the more you work with this, the more you will be asking yourself, how is this working and is it working the way I want? And when you see the arrows in the grand total columns, that seems to disrupt everything. So here's an option worth considering as well. We're seeing what's happening right now on this list, and it's hard to make sense out of how to read these numbers now and the arrows that accompany them. But if we go to the Design tab in the ribbon, second button from the left, Grand Totals, how about Off for rows and columns? We're going to take off the grand total column on the right, the grand total row at the bottom. Now I think we have a little bit more logic involved here as to how to explain how to read these. I think for the most part, this feature works best when you have only two fields. In other words, one field in the column area, one field in the row area. It tends to work best like that. Although what we're doing here at different times, it can surprise you. And I think it's worth you analyzing how you might use these. But there's no question this is a dynamic feature, and it gives added weight to the pivot table concept. We can get some really good, strong visuals here as to what's going on with sales pertaining to this particular worksheet here.